author. What do you want to tell us about immigration, or what do you want to talk
Well,
about?
as far as the United States is concerned,
Hmm.
immigration is really one of those qualities that really define what the United States is.
Sure.
From its fairly early history, when you're talking about people that fled Europe, um, religious persecution, whatever, also political persecution, and to leave their confines of Europe. And then you have, also involuntary immigration, to put it mildly and nicely, for the slave trade that brought African Americans here centuries
Mm.
ago. There's
Is that
that.
what they call it? Okay. I didn't
I
know
mean,
that they call that involuntary immigrant. Okay.
yeah, involuntary immigration. Yeah, and that's just a. Yeah, I just wanted to
Sounds
kind of
very
give it an
politically
immigration
correct.
flavor, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's slavery, and
Hmm.
it brought people here. And my point is that the vast majority, and almost the entirety, but the vast majority of the U.S. population essentially comes from somewhere else.
Of course. Yeah. Exactly. Except for Native Americans, Indians.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So I have a few quotes we can start off with. All right.
All right.
So
Let's have it.
why
Here's
not
the
go
first
right
grenade,
directly
everyone.
to the father of the country, George Washington?
Yeah.
Right. He says, "The bosom of America is open to receive not only the opulent and respected stranger, but the oppressed and persecuted of all nations and religions,
Mm-hmm.
whom we shall welcome to a participation of all our rights and privileges."
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then I'll go
Everybody's
fast
welcome.
forward. What's
Hmm.
that? Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm just restating what you're saying. So everybody's welcome,
Hmm.
and we will avail them of all the benefits. Yes,
Yep.
go on.
And so we'll go fast forward to much later. But this is John F. Kennedy. Everywhere immigrants have, everywhere rather, everywhere immigrants have enriched and strengthened the fabric of American life. We are a nation of immigrants. And
Yeah.
then finally, I'll mention Barack Obama, and he kind of just mirrors exactly that. But this is just to give it his own quote: "We are and always will be a nation of immigrants." So it's interesting. It is something that even from our American presidents, they've recognized as being something fundamental to who we are.
Uh, okay, so yes, obviously we're a country of immigrants, but I think that what's missing in these quotes is that it's very one-sided in that we're saying immigration is great. That is the backbone of this country. What it's
Mhm.
not recognizing is that while it is great, and with all good things, there come with it some bad things as well. So we have to acknowledge that. Maybe it's implicit, it's definitely not explicitly stated, but with good comes the bad. We have to acknowledge that. I think that is a truth that is attendant with any gray matter, right?
Okay, so why don't we discuss that? So,
Yeah.
what would you say, and well, how would you identify some of the bad things?
Well, I think that is not exclusive. The things that we identify as bad with immigration is not exclusive to immigrants. It's not like because you're an immigrant, you commit crimes. I think some people would like us to think that. That is just not true because everybody commits crimes. It doesn't mean that Americans don't commit crimes. But I think that that's another fallacy, right? That immigrants are responsible for the crimes. It is not true. But I think that what the whole thing of crimes coming from immigrants and why that's problematic is that I think there's a segment of the population that sort of believes that like this whole adage of no good deed goes unpunished. Well, we're letting people into this country to help them, blah blah blah, avail them of the benefits and their betterment. But at the same time, we become resentful when we're doing a good deed and we inadvertently admit people who are a drain on our resources because they commit crimes. That's not good. And secondly, the ones who come here illegally, if they commit crimes, it's almost seen as, well, that's even worse. That's like twice as bad as if an American commits the same crime, because not only are you here illegally, but now on top of that, you're misbehaving. So I think that's the rub. That's what really pisses Americans off.
Hmm, interesting. Well, I would say that is certainly reflected by a segment of the population. I
Yeah.
would also say that it is a very much not not always, but sometimes it's a disguised ethnocentrism or even
Sure. Yeah.
discriminate bias towards immigrants. I think partially it's that because indeed, when we're talking about crime, for example, the vast majority of crime is not by immigrants. That's
Mm,
by and large true.
for sure. Yeah.
And what happens is that you have individuals who will use certain events
Mm,
to sort of highlight the fact that they're a danger to society, when
yeah.
in fact they're really reflecting their own bias. That's
Yeah.
one thing. The other thing I would say is that when you talk about this idea of whether immigration is good and bad, I think there's a fair case to be made that it is always good,
Uh-huh.
always. And the reason that it is always or possibly always good is that when you have the influences and inclusion of various members of global societies, you're going to have an infusion of ideas. You're going to have an infusion of a dynamism and also fusion of not just inclusion, but a fusion of ideas from various cultural elements, whether it's related to food or music or anything else. And in that sense, there's always something new and vibrant coming out. In fact, I would say that that is probably one of the reasons that America is so vibrant and dynamic in its culture. It's because of that diversity. So I think for those people who are saying, well, yeah, but there's also it's a national security risk when you got terrorists coming in. To me, that's like extreme outliers that are
Mm,
used to basically feed someone else's own bias. But yeah, bias is there. The other thing I would say is, and we all have our biases, but the other thing I
mm,
would say is that, by and large, people who want to come to this country, they simply want to, for lack of a better term, be able to pursue some dreams, some aspirations that are either limited or absent in their own societies and communities. And sometimes it is about persecution. And if we're going to be that model, as we say we should be welcoming those people who are fleeing persecution. And I think again, some of the biases come out against that because they'll say, well, that's their problem and not ours. I think there's a little bit of yeah, it's not just ethnocentrism, but a certain degree of selfishness, and I think that's not necessarily the best quality to have. But that's me.
Well, I think that we can agree that immigration is a good thing, but I want to emphasize that we're talking about legal immigration. That's always a good thing, legal immigration.
Hmm.
And the other thing is that while it may be a good thing, I think everything requires control, and everything there needs to be a valve also, because as with anything that's good, it needs to be mediated so that there's a sort of this balance. So it's a bit like rain. We need the rain. We need it. But if it's too much too soon all at once, we flood. We get flooded. There's damage, right? So we want control. There needs to be some control so that we get the benefits of immigration with of course, as in our self-interest, and it's reasonable to think like this, we want the benefits without the detriments to the extent possible. That is why I think controls are necessary. And thirdly, and I got a comment from somebody a while back when I did another immigration podcast, that I said, um, I find that a lot of people want to come to this country for personal benefits, and that's fine. Everybody's in it for themselves. But also, I think what's lacking is people want to come here not thinking so much of how they can contribute to the country, how they can make the US a better place, but always from the perspective of what I can get from the US, how it's going to benefit me. And so I said, so why don't you guys start thinking about what you can do to make the US a better place, not only thinking about the fruit that you can pick from our tree, right? And so then I got a comment about, why do you think immigration is a bad thing? So I got a little pushback on that. So I do think that
Well,
yeah, we need to think about that, or you guys need to think about that.
I think it's natural for anyone to, whether they're fleeing safety or fleeing rather persecution, trying to seek safety, or whether they're simply trying to advance themselves economically.
Yes.
That's just normal, whether
Yeah.
people are moving from one state to another or whether they're moving from one country to another. That's to be expected. The thing is that when we look at what impacts there are,
Yes.
okay, and I get your point. Let me just go back to that point about immigration and controls, because I used to work for the Department of Homeland Security, right? So, I mean, this is something I think is an issue of sovereignty as well. Every country should be able to maintain and manage its borders. They have that right, and whether it's Europe that does it collectively amongst all those countries in Europe as part of the European Union, and or if it's whether it's you're talking about individual countries, they should have that right uh, to be able to do that. And to be fair, I mean, it is very difficult to manage a huge influx in a very short period of time. That's a difficult management problem and a governing problem, and it's not easy for any country. And of course, Europe, in the late several years ago, in the late 2016 to 2020, had a huge, continue to have some, but it's had a huge influx of Mediterranean migrants coming across, and also coming in from all over the region, as far away as Afghanistan and all the way down south into Africa, coming into Europe. It's difficult to manage. But that being said, when people come in and they're thinking of, okay, they're not going to be thinking, what can I do to contribute? But they do contribute because they're going to be not only providing for the labor in many industries that are needing it, whether it's in the hotel and restaurant industry or in agriculture, they do provide that at a fairly low cost, and people know that. Sometimes they're even taking advantage of that. But in the end, they're trying to establish themselves, and will do so by sometimes, in many cases, like people like the Turkish guy who started this yogurt company, and then it was like a multi-billion-dollar company and employed thousands of people. There's a lot of people who actually employ others, and small businesses too, because they need to establish themselves and they don't have the technical skills to suddenly be a lawyer or a doctor or whatever else. They'll usually drive a cab and just put their kids to school. So I think when we look longer term, the benefits are there, but I think it's a fair point to be made that every country should be able to have the wherewithal or right to be able to say, no, we can't have this many people come in at once, and here's a process.
And I think that not a lot of times, but sometimes the processes are ignored. Sometimes people find ways to get around legal ways to come to the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And and when that happens, you just know that when people are not willing to go through legal channels, that they cannot be coming to the U.S. for any benefit other than their own. Which is, I guess, natural, because you want to come here, you're thinking about yourself. Our country, we have the right to think about what we want for ourselves as well. So it's natural. Everybody's in it for themselves. But I think that once again, if it's not legal immigration, it's very hard to convince that hosting country, the country you want to go to, that you're going to end up being an asset if already right off the bat you didn't come in the right way. So that's a problem. I think that then so what happens is that there's this rebuttable presumption that you are not good for this country if you didn't enter legally. Of course, that's a presumption that can be rebutted. So now you have to prove how you can be an asset to this country despite the fact that you entered illegally, right? So I do have a problem with illegal immigration. I don't have a problem with legal immigration. And I think that many people can agree on that point, that we don't want illegal, we want legal immigration.
Yeah. And that's obviously, it's going to be one of those big issues in any election. And I think it's going to be one of those issues in the upcoming election as well. So there was one thing I also wanted to mention, even if we don't get into the controversy of policies of immigration or how to manage flows of people coming in our case, in the United States from the southern border. If you look at just the outcomes of immigration over the last couple centuries, there's some interesting things to see. And I wanted to kind of touch on those, but it really is about sort of where are the remnants of immigration now, and what are the remnants of immigration over the last couple of centuries? What has it meant for what populations exist in certain places and what people speak in certain places? So I thought I'd touch on that. The interesting thing, did you know that the second most, I'm not the second, the language that is spoken the most, other than English and Spanish in Virginia, what would you guess that to be, other than English or Spanish in Virginia?
In Virginia, I don't know what the immigrant population is in Virginia. I
All right,
would
how
say
about
some
California?
Asian language.
Yeah. Oh, so how about California, other than English or
California.
Spanish?
Other than English or Spanish, I'm going to say some Asian language. I'm not sure what it would be, but it's probably some Asian language because there's so many Asians
Yeah.
in
So pick one.
California. Uh, Chinese?
No,
What is it?
it's Tagalog.
Vietnamese? I'm sorry?
Tagalog. It's
Oh, so
Philippine language.
Filipinos. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
And same thing in Nevada, oddly enough. But anyway, what would you say about the language that is most spoken other than English or Spanish in Texas?
Vietnamese.
You're right.
I heard there's a lot of
You get the
Vietnamese
award.
in Texas.
Okay.
Yes. Uh-huh.
It's kind of interesting, and you have this smattering of, and this is something that probably most people outside the United States wouldn't know,
Mhm.
that there's a large Vietnamese population in Texas.
Houston, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. And what about the state of Washington?
The state of Washington. I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe Hindu or some Indian language.
Well, the language of India, one of the languages would be Hindi, but it's not Hindi.
Uh-huh.
It is also Vietnamese in the state of Washington.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay. But now this might be an easy one. You might get this one. Michigan.
Good God, I don't know.
Arabic.
Arabic. There are a lot of Arabs in Michigan. I didn't know that. Okay.
It has the largest Arab population outside of the Middle East. In Dearborn, in fact. They have
Dearborn. Okay.
Dearborn and the surrounding areas of Detroit. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
okay.
I
Very interesting. So, and the point.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, and the point. What does this tell us? What does this tell us when we see that these are widely spoken? These languages are widely spoken, other than Spanish and English.
Well, this is not something that occurred over the last decade or two.
Mhm.
It's much longer. These are people who have had not just immigration to that state or that region, but they have grandchildren and probably grandchildren who lived there from immigrants who came to that state.
Mhm.
Right? They've been there a long time. By and large, I would say most of them were legal immigrants.
Mhm.
Not all, but I'm sure mostly were. And so they have sort of been influencing what would be the eventual fabric of that region, and whether it is, and I think, there are some arguments to be made that, it's kind of misleading to just say there's one that's spoken the most, because I would say Korean is really significant in certain parts of California, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with the Chinese community, whether they're from, Hong Kong or other parts of China. And so they've been there for, in some cases, well over 100 years. And so they're part of the fabric of the United States. And that's also been varied, different from one region of the country to the other.
Mhm.
And
Okay,
there's
so
reasons why they're
they're here
go to
legally.
certain
They've
parts
been
of the
here for
country.
generations. They're good. We don't care about them. They're fine. We like right. Everybody can agree they're good.
Well, yeah, but I would also say that when you look at the history of immigration in the U.S., what was considered legal and non-legal immigration is very much in question.
It's
Okay.
all policy driven. It's just what is legal at the time.
Yeah, but also what process? When we're talking about legal processes of immigration,
Hmm.
it's like, are you following the rules to get in? Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, not only no problem, we'll just change your name, and then you'll just come in as whoever we would tell you. And it was a very much more loose process, whether it was Irish immigrants or Italian immigrants coming in from Europe, or for that matter, Mexican Americans who are coming in, uh, easily walking back and forth over the border in the early part of the 20th century. No problem whatsoever. Like they would just go back and forth, and there was very little control. So it varied in terms of how people even came across. In fact, some people came across, as long as they could afford it, it was just a matter of getting there, and they'll process the paperwork when they arrived. That was for most Chinese immigrants.
Hmm. These are all policy driven things. These kind of things, they don't happen organically. This whole thing of borders is very methodical, right? So if you think about it, in a way, it's very unnatural to have borders at all because um, you know, people just used to roam the land. We were nomadic. There were no borders. But in any population, whether they be humans or animals, there is such a thing as, territorialism. And I think that's where it all comes from, this idea
Mhm.
of this belongs to me. And so I think people have a right to set up borders. I think that it is too bad that even, for example, just traveling, like we need visas. And the whole visa approval process is very much like immigration policies in a way, right? It's like immigration light. Um, in that they decide who to let in based completely on the experience that they recently had with this group of people, whether they're going to let people into the country on a visa, as a
Yeah.
tourist even. So, and why is it that we are not all up in arms about that when we say, hey, you know what? Because what was it like in was it in, oh gosh, I don't remember which country this was, but there was something where people from that country came. They robbed some liquor stores, and then they weren't allowing people from that country. Uh, they were denying all visas from people from that country because of this robbery. And apparently, when it comes to visa approvals, people are not as offended by that. But yet, we can't apply that metric for immigration. So I don't know. It seems inconsistent.
Do you think we should be limiting certain groups based on the actions of certain people who are breaking laws?
I think that you have to look at the totality of the situation. I think that looking at recent events must it has to play a role, but you also have to look at other people that you've let in and to see the value that they've contributed, and you balance and you do it's a balancing process. It's a seesaw,
How do you
right?
assess that value?
I don't know because I'm not an immigration officer. I don't work in creating policy like that, but I think that every piece of evidence does need to be considered, and we can't discount evidence that on its face seems damning or seems really, you know, mm, unfair. I think every piece of evidence needs to be examined carefully, and we can't just be like, "Oh, no, no, no," right? Just because it doesn't serve our needs or it doesn't serve the needs of those people. We have to be fair in the way we assess, the situation, the circumstance, and the evidence. But it does need to all be considered. It can't just be like, "No, we must not look at this." No, we need all the information in order to make an informed decision.
Yeah, I would say it's 100% irrelevant that somebody from your community committed a crime,
Hmm.
that you would be, somehow generalized to be somehow in this group of potential criminals.
Hmm.
That's just patently wrong. Okay.
Hmm.
I mean, yes, you can think about it. It's like saying, okay, you know what? They used to do this with the African community in certain places, and sometimes they would even concoct a crime in order
Hmm.
to target the entire African American community. I don't think we should be doing that with immigration either. Uh, and we've got individuals who are, for whatever reasons, if they're coming to the US, let's say, and for the sake of argument, say they're coming legally, what does it matter that members of their community were committing crimes in the US? It
So,
doesn't at all.
uh-huh. Okay.
It's complete. and 100% discriminatory, without question. I mean, why would we say we need to consider what Muslims are doing in the U.S.? And by the way, most of them are, by and large, 100%, almost by, not 100%. They're pretty much law-abiding. Like most people, they're law-abiding. But we had a president who wanted to ban, and in fact, it was in this most recent Project 2025 that they're trying to now distance themselves to say that Muslims should be banned from the country. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's anti-American. It's as anti-American as saying somebody who is Chinese American committed a crime in California, killing a few people. And you know what? We need to stop Chinese people from coming in. That's ridiculous.
So it's very interesting because, like there's certain types of discrimination that we all accept. Like, for example, risk assessment, right? It happens all the time. If you are a certain age group and you're going to pay more for your insurance because you are assessed based on your group, your risk, and you pay more, that's discrimination.
You're
Just because
assuming that there's a certain greater risk because someone has a certain ethnic background?
No, but
Right.
what I'm saying
That's
is,
the point.
well,
There's no additional risk
what I'm
just
saying
by
is
virtue of that
there's
factor.
certain risks, there's certain things that we accept, and yet when it comes to immigration, we will accept nothing, as if prior experience will have no bearing on the potential future experience. So I think that I'm not saying that prior experience wholly governs future results, but I'm saying that it would be short-sighted and an incomplete picture to say that prior experiences would have no influence on
Yeah.
a future
As a matter
outcome.
of principle,
Mhm.
as a matter of principle, we as a country are trying to define ourselves by this idea that our ethnicity, our religion, our background should not be any basis of just any discrimination. Whether you start to look at it in statistical terms and saying a certain number of African Americans are committing crimes in certain cities, or whether you're talking about a certain number of people who committed, atrocities outside the country. You can't say, well, most people from your country, yeah, you know what? There's a risk. That is just that is on matter of moral and ethical grounds and on principled grounds. It goes contradictory to the U.S. Idea of being we're not talking about open borders. We're saying, what's the principle here? What is the principle? It seems that when people who are saying we have to consider the risks are basically saying, well, you know where they're coming from, right? You know what religion they are, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a disguised racism or some sort of ism. It's definitely disguised ism. But if you're going to be talking about policies, then just say, you know what? We welcome you. Just follow this rule. Then there
Mhm.
is no, well, yeah, we welcome you, but we need to look at a few other things about you.
Yeah.
And specifically, not necessarily about whether you're a criminal or not, because maybe that's a legitimate reason, but just the fact that you have a certain
But
gender identity, religious identity, ethnic identity, that is on matters of principle. That if we start going on that, we are going in another direction than where this country's gone for more than almost 250 years.
well, if you think about it, why even discriminate against criminals? Because if you think about it,
Nobody's
you can
saying we
also,
shouldn't discriminate
yeah,
against criminals.
we
That's
should
why we put them
also.
in jails.
No, I'm saying why don't we let in criminals? Because if you think about it, you could even make the argument that the justice system is not a fair system and they were prosecuted for unfair reasons. And
They may
second
have
of
been.
and
They may
second of
have been
all,
outside of the U.S.
it's quite possible that that somebody who is a convicted criminal still can contribute a lot to the U.S. I mean, I'm just
People who have
thinking,
been speaking out against their own governments in other countries have been branded as criminals.
yeah.
So
So
they're a criminal.
yeah. So a crime in itself is not. It's not a foregone conclusion that a person has no value in society. If you believe that the justice system a fundamentally how can we say fallible machine. So the thing of it is that I think that every criteria that you look at has to be administered in a fair way, and you have to look at the totality of everything, of the circumstance, and everything has to be looked at uh, with equal weight. And I think that if you were to include where somebody comes from equally as you would include other things, I don't think that's inherently unfair.
Would you
Um,
say it's equal weight when you're saying a person with the same general qualities of legality are then you sort of put the thumb on one scale and say, yeah, but this person, their background is Irish Catholic.
mhm.
And you say, that's a negative. That's
We
okay.
because of their religious. I don't know. I'm not sure. I follow you.
If someone is saying
Uh-huh.
certain people can come in who have the same general qualities of legality, they're
Yeah.
not criminals,
Hmm.
but one is of a certain faith, one is of a certain ethnic group. You're saying it's reasonable to say, consider the risk of someone coming from this particular community.
I think that no one is necessarily a higher risk if in a vacuum you were to judge every people just by their status, like, oh, where they're from, their religion, their whatever, right? But then you can extrapolate that to, oh, this person we're letting in only has a high school degree diploma versus somebody who has a higher level degree. So where does it end? But what I'm just saying is that you have
We
the
do
right
tip the scales,
as a
in,
country to
different
decide what
ways,
we
right?
want. Huh?
We do we do tip the scales in different ways in this country. We'll
Mm-hmm.
let people come in who are putting a larger sum of money on the table to say,
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to invest in a certain company or in a certain amount in the US because I'm investing this amount,
Mm-hmm.
they get a greater weight.
Well, you know what? Everybody has to gain from it, right? I mean,
So that's okay.
it's nice if we can do, and we do, and America does. We do accept people where we don't derive an immediate gain, right? It's But at the same time, if we were to accept somebody because we also want an immediate quid pro quo, I think that's okay as well.
Yeah.
Again, it has to be varied. There has to be different motivations, and everything has to be looked at equally, right? There has to be different types of immigration that we permit. I just think about, how when I got my residency in an EU country, they did so many checks. They had to look at my bank account. They had to look at my criminal record. They had to look at my level of education. They were very selective in terms of who they wanted. And as I was told by my lawyer, um, they really wanted Americans. So are they being discriminatory? But you know, this every country has their own way of discriminating, and but maybe we shouldn't use the word discriminating. Maybe we should just say that everybody has the right to select what is beneficial to them, or what they see as beneficial to their country. And while we wanting to get in may feel like that's unfair, at the end of the day, it's not our country, and so they have, in a way, a right. Because for me, I could have just said, why did they put me through the hell to get residency in an EU country? I know I'm good, right? But it's not my country. I don't have a say.
Yeah, not well, you don't have a vote yet. Or
Yeah,
if you ever want to get one, it's not, for a while. But I mean, every country can determine what they want to do to not only allow people into their country, but also whether they're going to put any barriers or
yeah.
or establish a process to become a citizen. In certain countries, it's basically impossible to become a citizen.
Mm-hmm.
Impossible.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the
Like,
whole
doesn't matter
natural
if
born
you have two or
citizen
three
thing is a
generations
uniquely
living there.
American thing, right?
What's that?
The natural born citizenship thing is it a uniquely American thing?
No.
No, okay. Because I know some countries like in the Middle East, there is no natural born
You could even
citizenship.
be born in the countries in the Middle East. That doesn't guarantee you anything.
That's
Uh,
right. You can't be born into citizenship.
in many countries, that's true.
Yeah.
Uh, in Europe, I don't think that's the case. Most European countries, if you're born in the UK, or you're probably I'm pretty sure you're a UK citizen.
Yeah.
I don't know the citizenship laws of every country, but I know it's not the case everywhere. I would say in most countries that we consider part of the Western world
Hmm.
that are open to uh, having immigrants.
Hmm.
Yeah, if you're born there, you're a citizen.
You're a citizen. Yes.
And if it weren't for immigration, this is an economic fact. Certain countries would be in recession permanently. Permanently.
Hmm.
Now,
Hmm.
other countries, they're they are shrinking in population, low birth rates, and they're growing. But they're going to have a challenge, you know, 10, 20, 30 years from now. Countries like South Korea or Italy.
Yeah, Italy has a problem for sure.
So, you need immigration as an economic fact. You need it for industries. You
Yes.
don't just need it for, food and music. I mean, you need it
Yes.
in
You
order
know,
to
you
be
do.
vibrant as an economy. And if you don't have it, and by the way, and I don't know if you recall this, when immigrants were first coming across the border, yeah, and into the EU Schengen zone, and coming, in boats and whatever. Many of those countries were initially very welcoming of it, especially Germany. Did you know why?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they very much wanted it.
Well, they have a
They
guilty conscience too.
No, it wasn't about the guilty conscience. It was about labor.
Uh-huh.
It was about labor. They really needed it.
Yeah. There's been
The
some
guilty
backlash
conscience
too. That
is what is shutting down all references and communication or discussions related to what's going on in Israel and Palestine. That's the guilty conscience in play. But as far as the immigration was concerned, they were like, this is great. And then as it started to get worse, then they said, we need to have a special agency to establish border controls in Europe. And a lot of these countries were their right wing elements started coming out of the woodwork saying, you know what? This is crazy. We don't want these people here,
hmm.
because they were literally sleeping on the streets. And
Hmm.
so it's a terrible optics. And I'm sure it's good with good reason. I don't want people sleeping on my front yard, or, just walking around in my neighborhood. You don't know who they are. That's normal. But it's a human response to a pretty big problem, and they're looking to solve that problem. But every country is going to do it differently. Maybe we need to get away from this topic from a controversial standpoint. I, I I guess wasn't necessarily thinking about going down those lines. I just wanted to say that there are there are very clear and visible consequences to immigration in the United States as it's occurred over the last couple of hundred years.
Yes.
You're a consequence of that. I am, and it's the food, it's the languages spoken in certain parts of the country, it's the people that you see whose faces are on television and voices you hear on the radio. The voices are not the same white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males that were typically on television, you know, 40, 50, 60 years ago. The country has definitely had an impact. I mean, it hasn't been impacted by immigration. You can say it's good or bad, but it's there. That's all. It's definitely
Yes, yes, it's not a bad thing. We can all agree that we like immigration, and that's it. We like legal immigration. I'm sorry, we always say immigration, but what we were saying is we all like legal immigration. I don't know many people who like illegal immigration unless they themselves came here illegally. I think most people are talking about legal immigration. So and we can all agree legal immigration is a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's about understanding that there's a process by which we would like you to follow, or
Hmm.
that we would hold our own relatives to follow wherever they're coming from. You know, and it makes it a more manageable uh, process and it's more easy to acclimate and to get, to be part of the society. You want to be included in some way, and if that includes documentation, that's a good thing.
Hmm.
But there are people who come across with no documentation, and it's because of extreme persecution. And
Hmm.
people think that that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, there are people who believe that. There are people who believe that people are just coming to take their job, which is ridiculous. Okay. Like, but what they're, people do come with nothing. And that's been the case with a lot of these people who have had their country taken over by gangs, for example, in Central America. The entire country, we're talking about Honduras, El Salvador for a long time. It's been like, it was crazy. People would have to flee cities and towns because they would be threatened with death if they didn't join a gang or they weren't part of that. And the only way out was to leave. That's not me making up any story. That's real stuff. Or
Hmm.
do they need to provide documentation of their birth when they may never have had a birth certificate? Or
Mm.
I don't, I think,
Look, it's not necessarily going to, procedures are procedures, and it's a hard line, and that's just
yeah,
it always is going there's always going to be some things that are maybe unfair, but I don't think that the goal is to be 100% fair. I think the goal is to be reasonably fair, again,
yeah,
when you take everything into consideration, because I don't think there's any process or procedure that is infallible and can be completely fair. You do the best you can, and that's why procedures are in place. They don't, procedures are not there to say, look how our score is 100%. No, that's not the purpose of a procedure. It's
yeah,
that we're doing pretty well on balance. That's the purpose of a procedure.
yeah. Anyway, we should close out on a positive note. I mean, what else would you say are the sort of the positives of immigration? People coming from China, South America, the Middle East, who have settled in various parts of the U.S. for many decades, it's like the ones I mentioned. Some coming as a result of war, like Vietnamese, or some coming, to
Well,
whatever.
I
I
think
mean,
that immigration, immigrants just enable a country, any country, to be more competitive on a global stage. Anyway, that's what it is. And also as a people, as people, and we know from science, natural selection, it's good to diversify the genes. Also, that's a great thing too, right? We become stronger and smarter because of immigrants. The mixing is definitely a good thing.
yeah, I think I recall. I didn't hear the whole thing, but there you had maybe a podcast about what does an American look like,
Yes.
right? And that's a a lot of people do have a certain sense of what an American looks like, and they might not be thinking of you or I, but we are Americans, and there's a lot of Americans that don't fit that mold, and I think that's good. That's good. We've got people who have had different influences culturally, um, as well as faith-based differences. Some are of no faith. That's cool too. And I have, a pretty broad mix of people I've come across and people who have now become part of my extended family, actually, even with huge amounts of diversity. And that's part of the American fabric. I think that's what sort of one of the things I was trying to get at. You know, there are these things that will allow us to be united in spite of these differences. Like you and I, we've talked about being an American, and there are things that we identify with, even regardless of our differences of background. You know what I mean?
Yes. So yeah, yes, I think that still, I think a lot of people in other countries, they think of an American as either white or black, and that is the furthest from the truth. And I think that with more immigration, I think that will, well, it'll start to inform, but also it'll start to sort of just change the people's idea of what an American is or what American looks like, which is that an American can be anybody. It can be anybody. Uh, yeah, there's no look
Well,
of it.
Ben, if you went to Paris, which
Mhm.
I think you're glad you're avoiding it because I've heard it's terrible to sort of experience it, other than for the maybe a few of the fans and the participants in the games. But I
Mhm.
think for being in and around Paris, it's good to avoid it. But if you were in Paris seeing the U.S. team, you'd see that amazing diversity, right? Because
Yeah, yeah.
it's there literally on the stage for many people to see.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the ways that people begin to do it. And then social media, people start to see a bit more of that diversity. Those faces that we were very limited in seeing because there were only a few channels when we were growing up.
Yeah.
That's not the case anymore. People have all kinds of ways of seeing what the American public is really like.
I think the U.S. ultimately ends up being the final acceptor of the greatest talent in the world because the U.S. they know how to attract talent and they know how to pluck them from places, and so that also contributes to the diversity of our team as well.
That's also, yeah, and that's a great point. And there's a huge draw there for those people who have great talents. One of the things that they also recognize is that the U.S. is sort of the proving ground for that.
Hmm.
They could succeed possibly in their own countries, but they could succeed even more and perhaps even have more options of paths, different paths to pursue in a country like
Yeah,
the U.S.
because they say if you can make it big in America, you can make it in anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
It's true.
Anyway, do you want to close with any thoughts here? I mean, I
Mm.
I have to apologize to say that I didn't mean to come across so strong in my views, but I guess the point was that one of the things that we also want to say is a strength of the United States is that this ability to be able to go back and forth on various issues and have that dialogue without
Hmm.
thinking that we can't say certain things. We can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, just the fact that, for example, just because you might have sounded a little bit challenging, that's no problem. I'm game for that. I think that it's
Yeah.
good when people have disagreements because it's disagreements that move people along. It's dissatisfaction that moves the society forward. If you're always complacent, everybody's complacent. What's the reason to do anything new? It's only when there's dissatisfaction that humankind really progresses. So I think that that's fine. I think that divergent viewpoints are celebrated, and it's a great thing. So, well, I thank you for that. Thank you for this podcast. Thanks.
We had to have a few fireworks. Why not? Right.
Of
Uh,
course, absolutely.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be American.
Yes.
Anyway, thanks. Yeah, that was great, Ben. Yeah, I think we can definitely agree on many things. We're always going to have those differences of perspective. I don't want to even say opinion. It's a different perspective on certain issues, but there's always some common ground to be found here. Uh, yeah, immigration, I think, is a good thing. It is something that we have to understand is also a huge responsibility for any government because they got to manage the ways people come in and are vetted,
Hmm.
uh, and they have that right. So makes sense.
All right. So, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Arthur, and we will see you guys in the next podcast.
All right,
So,
sounds good. Thanks, Ben.
yep. Bye bye for now.